Hi, I'm Justin Moorman.
And I'm Katie Thornton, and this is the Re-Education of Schools podcast,
where we have open, honest conversations about how to better understand social-emotional learning, trauma-informed care, the whys behind student behavior, and how to help kids navigate it all as they go through school and life. Welcome back to our next episode. This week's podcast is actually going to potentially sound a little bit different than our normal ones, but we're super excited for it. This episode is actually a crossover episode with the Character Strong podcast with John Norlin. So we're recording with him, and then they're airing it as one of their episodes for the Character Strong podcast, and we'll be airing it as one of our episodes for the Re-Education of Schools podcast.
Yeah, kind of fun with your friends at podcast.
That's right.
Yeah, so I'm going to kick it off with a little bio about John and also about the Character Strong organization to kind of give our viewers a little preview. So John was a classroom teacher for 10 years and a district administrator for a program administrator for the whole child for 5 years. He's also a co-founder of Character Strong with Houston Craft. They have worked together every day to build meaningful curriculum and trainings for schools. A little bit about Character Strong. There's really three big things. They focus on bringing together SEL and character education intentionally to combine foundational skills with ongoing behavior change and celebration. The second thing is they have a pre-K through 12 grade model that is vertically aligned and strong focus on making curriculum relevant to those hard to reach middle school and high school students. Mm-hmm. And lastly, they really emphasize professional development and ongoing implementation support, which I can't speak highly enough about them through that lens. What we really love about this company is that they are a trauma-informed, restorative-centered organization that is child first. The heart of what they do is teaching children, all children, to be better humans. And this is really what our work's about. So we are excited to have our conversation with them up next.
Yeah, listen in. You're going to enjoy it.
All right. I am so thrilled to welcome to the Character Strong podcast, Justin Moorman and Katie Thornton, the hosts of the Re-Education of Schools podcast. I know you're outside your normal environment today. You're coming live from school, but glad to have you with us. Thanks for joining us.
Thanks for having us. We're really excited to join you guys today and have a lot to share with the listeners about how your organization really has helped and supported our school district. So,
yeah, definitely excited. Thanks for having us on.
Yeah, well, I always try to flip it and go, I think the excitement's the other way, but especially if you've been implementing it, but also just hearing more about the podcast. I know it usually when you're on the host side, I always say it's super selfish because all you're doing is getting a chance to learn from incredible people who are in the work, passionately leading it. And so before we always jokingly say we cut the fluff, we get right to the stuff because that stuff's really important, right? Also, educators don't always listen to a 40-minute podcast unless it's, like true crime or something. But if we're digging right in, a core belief at Character Strong is at the core of our work, it's all about relationships. And I'd love just to hear, what's a favorite relational strategy that you found to be either effective or a go-to for you, whether it's working with students or even adults?
Yeah, I think one of the things that I've noticed that I've tried to implement, and I know a lot of our people here have tried to implement, is more of a self-reflection at some point before we kind of start our day. One of the things that's kind of ultimately unfortunate, kind of a byproduct of having more standardized academic practices and curriculum and things like that, is that we can inadvertently kind of become more factory-ish, right? Schools can almost become more like churning out a product, making sure you're hitting all the things on the assembly line, things like that. Not because anybody's trying to do anything wrong, but I think it's just an easy thing to have happen. And so, yeah, there has to be like systems. Yeah, there has to be lesson plans. Yeah, there has to be tests. All the things have to be hit. But what I always try to remind myself is to slow down enough to be able to remember that I'm working just with a room full of humans. Yeah. Right? It's all humans. And author I've been reading here lately, still kind of a line from him, John Mark Comer. He was saying, we're all, myself included, we're all in the process of becoming human together. And that's true in our classrooms as well. So whether you're an administrator, whether you're in a classroom and you're there with your kids, you're all actually in the same boat, maybe different roles, obviously, but all in the same boat together of becoming human together and spending a ton of time together, becoming human together. And so it's an important thing to remember. And yeah, all the other stuff is important, but that's kind of the pinnacle thing. So to be able to start my day kind of reminding myself of that is pretty big.
Yeah, well said. And I was thinking about, in terms of the habit and or the skill, but that idea of like slowing down enough to do that. And a lot of times in trainings, I'll refer to an older study, and I won't go into the whole study, but the idea that the kicker line at the end, the kicker question is, how many of you have felt like you've been in a rush between building A and building B recently? And literally, every hand, in the room.
Every time.
It's moving. And that's not just for educators, that's the world, right, that we live in. And so how do we build in those habits, right, and the skill of slowing down enough to self-reflect? So I love that as a powerful relational strategy tool for all of us to be thinking about deeply, to be more effective in co-creating that together. Well, let's dig into the main idea, because I know we might do this a little bit differently, and that you also have a podcast. So I want to hear more about that. Super excited. But let's talk first about, you mentioned implementing Character Strong. So talk to me about implementing the Character Strong resources to create a trauma-informed, restorative, and inclusive school.
Yeah, so Justin and I both have a background in educational neuroscience, and it was really important when we met and started nerding out about different ideas and concepts and really what we wanted to believe and what we wanted our school to feel and look like. It was about the same time we kind of walked along the journey with Character Strong when our district kind of started partnering with. And I was really excited to see a lot of the resources aligning with trauma-informed and educational neuroscience principles and concepts on top of restorative practices, and really creating that strong tier 1 classroom environment that we all kids are welcome and have access to. So a little bit about our school is that we have 300 students. We're about 20% economically disadvantaged, and we have about 20% special education. A unique feature is that we have 4 specialty units here at our school, 2 low incident programs, and 2 behavioral mental health programs here. And then a third of our students are gifted. So we had a really wide range of needs looking at our school's population. And then we really had to start prioritizing our specialists as a service and not a placement. So really shifting that mindset that all kids belong in tier 1 instruction. And then we really leaned into the educational neuroscience, a lot of educational law, and experience to create that inclusive school environment. And we've really kind of leaned into the motto of like, all are welcome here. Like, come as you are. We receive you. We love you. Everyone's welcome here. Tomorrow is always a fresh day. We're here to support you. And then we also spent a lot of time studying like universal design for learning and really building that school culture and climate of teaching kids and staff members about their brains and their bodies and how this all aligns. And
which all, not to interrupt you, which all sounds great, right? Yeah. That's all good stuff. It's all significantly harder to actually implement and get running than what one would think. Than what one think it is. Not because anybody's necessarily like against it or anything like that, but it just takes a lot of work. I mean, it takes a lot of work and intentionality.
Gonna have to go through the hard stuff. Yeah. And we get asked all the time, well, what do I do? Like there's this one magic staff meeting I'm gonna give, and then our whole school culture and climate, right? You probably get this asked a lot, John. It's just gonna change everything just by doing that. And I think it's really been helpful, we've used a lot of the Character Strong resources. And so I'm gonna share with the listeners today how we've done that. And so when people are saying, well, how do you create the trauma-informed, inclusive environment, here are some resources from Character Strong that we've used that maybe you can go back into your building or your staff meeting and do that. So first of all, we've adopted the Purposeful People curriculum, which is your tier 1 everyday SEL curriculum, which has created a lot of common language and consistency throughout our building. With that, we've also adopted the tier 2 and tier 3 curriculum, which we can talk more into that, but that has helped create and standardize a data-based interventions for kids and really looking at data to inform instruction instead of I think decisions, but going back and leading onto this data. So those tier 2 and tier 3 resources. So if you're a part of Character Strong, those things kind of come with the package. We have leaned in heavily to that tier 1 fidelity checklist and spent time not just handing people the checklist, but is sitting down and developing as a 3-part miniseries, along with the EMR playbook, which is Establish, Maintain, and Restore, to talk about relationships. Those two go hand to hand, and we've spent time, and we had other staff meetings outside of what Justin and I have led. We had 2 staff members that did a great job with that, and we turned it into like a 3-part miniseries to walk through that and kind of created it and made it our own. And then right now we're on a district-wide initiative with behavior, and we're using your on-demand PD modules, which are really good because it creates consistency with language and the messaging. So it's really easy for one expert to get up and talk and share things, but we created district-wide PLC groups, which has allowed cross-building conversations to happen. And some of the modules we're using are the PBIS framework, because we started back at the beginning, which is really important. I think some people start with the kids in crisis, but you will exhaust your system if you spend all your time with the kids in crisis. You have to go back to having strong tier 1 so that you have less kids in crisis all the time. So we're spending time on those PD modules for PBIS, the restorative practices, and then the thinking functionally about behavior. We're looking at the consequence strategies that are in there, which really align to restorative practices. And really the concepts of like Dr. Ross Green's work, which is the collaborative proactive solutions. You guys kind of have a very similar framework and philosophy that kind of aligns with Dr. Ross Green's behavior modules in there. And then that behavior and discipline rubric is a good fidelity check for building systems and district initiatives in terms of, am I really approaching things with an empathy-based and progressive approach?
I think one of the nice things about doing something that's more district-wide, that everybody's kind of getting the same information at the same time, because within districts, I mean, year to year, people move in and out of districts as well, but within a district, people move so frequently, right? From one year to the next, you're at different buildings, you're doing different things. And instead of somebody feeling like they have to just start over, or they don't know any of this language, by us doing it all as a district, what we find is everybody has common language, which is wildly important. Because when you start using certain words, they carry meaning and they carry value, and it could mean something to somebody else than it does to me, if we haven't gone through the process of having training that is the same and having conversations that are centered kind of around the same meaning of the words. And so it's a big deal, and that's a super important place, I think, for us to start district-wise, and for any district out there. I think that's an important thing to start thinking through, is how are you going to utilize common language, and where can you find that to make sure that's happening?
Yeah, I mean, I really appreciate so much. I mean, I feel like you mentioned the term geeking out. I feel like the three of us could geek out for the next 90 minutes plus on this. But just like so much, like even to the point where like that all sounds great. It's a whole nother thing to implement it, right? And then you start to share some of the ways specifically in which you've been doing it. But when I think about that idea of a district-wide approach, connecting it then to common language, and how many either haven't figured that out or stuck in this place where they feel like they can't, right? And you never, when you think about like the greater impact, you never get as much when it's those silos as you do if you have the district support. And you're always going to have some that are, doing better at times than others, because people are at different stages of implementation science, right? In terms of some are still in the readiness stage. And so, but what about that common language that we can keep coming back to? And without that, it just slows the work. We, like I said, we have to start over when someone moves from this building to the next, or even a student moves from one building to another, and now they're learning a different thing. Think about the opportunity lost there, the time lost, all those pieces. So I really appreciate that articulation, as well as how you've been utilizing those different tools. And like you said, the tools can be great also, flipping that, but they don't go anywhere if you don't have people that are intentionally implementing them, which I love hearing more about. Tell me more about that, just kind of with where you're at, and anything more about kind of that piece of how to bring that in and really get it to go where you're getting that common language and then moving to get to results, outcomes.
Yeah, I think we've been super lucky. We have an incredible staff here that was kind of ready to do the work when we came on here. Justin and I both came in about 4 years ago. Yep. We were lucky. People were ready. It was like post-COVID time. And we didn't have all the resources at the beginning. We spent a lot of time with educational law. Like, this is why, discipline has to change because of the school to prison pipeline, disproportionate identification of special education, or disproportionate discipline data, right? We have these unit-based programs, but the law really calls for them to have access to tier 1 instruction. And our teachers are so amazing about really getting that philosophical belief and implementing that lens in the classroom. And I think James Moffat has said it one time on the podcast, you have to go slow to go fast. And I think you have to sometimes we spend so much time with that direct instruction piece. If you think about good teaching principles, that I have had to be mindful about not just using direct instruction, but allowing that collaborative piece with the staff. I'm like such an advocate for PLC groups, because if you don't let people talk about it and have like real honest conversations where the administrator's not just listening. I actually don't participate in the PLCs here. They are free. I don't ask for notes. It is a safe place for them to share and
I say all kinds of crazy stuff during my PLC. No.
He goes to mine out, but yeah. So, but that is a really, like, I always walk away and people say administrative tip, like, use one of these resources and put it in a PLC group. Like, yeah, this looks great. I need to have a positive greeting at the door, right? But I also have this crazy thing happening this morning, or I'm just regulated myself because my kids weren't getting up and getting ready. Like, we're also humans as educators. So if you don't have that PLC group where you can offer each other's support and recognizing some of those things and you talking about some of those strategies, and some of our best resources are some of our veteran educators. So listening to tips and tricks that they've used and implemented, and it just constantly gets better. And so I'm excited that we started the district-wide initiative for the PLC groups, because it was wildly popular. We're getting ready to host our second one, and amazing feedback from the staff of just being able to listen, like, oh, behavior is not just at my school. It's at this other school over here too. And like, you're having similar problems, and how do I, and sometimes it comes back to size of the problem and how things are addressed and dealt with. But that's been really helpful. It's just letting people have that time to actually talk and use the resources in that way. And then I think as a school administrator, you've got to be consistently steady. So this is our belief. And it's not just the belief for the 30 minutes in the staff meeting. I have to hold it myself accountable, and I ask people to call me out when I'm not doing it, and making sure that this is our belief every day when we walk into our school, unwavering. So I think that's hard. We start initiatives and then we like drop the steadiness of them, and then we kind of lose it, you know?
Yeah. That's a lot of times what happens. It's like we say, oh, it didn't work. Well, was it implemented?
Yeah. Yes, the fidelity check, right?
Yeah.
John, we'll be, I know, this is kind of a different setup for us, right? Like, we're kind of we'll air this as on one of our podcasts. You'll be airing it as one of your podcasts. So I'm going to kind of turn the tables on you here a little bit and ask you a question.
I love it. It's like a first. So it's like a takeover or joint. This is fun.
We don't like to do stuff normal, apparently. So you're out there, you're seeing, with what you do, all kinds of different schools, all kinds of different districts all over the country. What do you think it is? And this isn't, I don't know if we sent you questions so that we might ask or not.
Yeah.
I don't know. This isn't one of them. Yeah. So off the cuff, what is it that you see that really makes people so apprehensive as a district to start? Like, what is kind of the hard part to actually get started and change in districts that you see?
It's a really great, question that I don't know if it ever has like one single answer, but I do think there's some consistent things. And, I was recently listening to a podcast around organizational change. And one thing that comes to mind right off the bat is it was an interesting paradigm shift. And I love paradigm shifts that get you thinking. And it was around this idea of it's not change that people actually fear. We always say, change is hard, or people don't like change. They actually offered a paradigm shift on that it's not change, it's actually the transition. That a lot of times we actually really invite change, and change can be a really good thing. But what is the scary part, or what we don't like, is the transition, and that part gets done really well. And so a part of it that I would say is, like you mentioned just a few moments ago, it's a lot of work. And so there's a part of it that's like, this is going to be a lot of work. And am I willing to get in there and do that work? And there better be a deep why. There better be really solid supports in place to even those that are the ones that are being called. So not only from the district level, but a lot of times that building level leader, where it's even creating that safe space to go for it, to fail. Here's how we're going to, and that takes a lot of work. That's one. But I also know, and have worked in education a long time, that we got people who are willing to roll up their sleeves and do work. And so it's not always that. I think sometimes it's just a knowledge thing. I don't know how. Because a lot of times when it comes to how to implement something, we talk about implementation science a lot. A lot of what you've been mentioning, I know that is your focus is what's been led by Dr. Clayton Cook on our team since the very beginning. And he's a big believer in that. It's been a big guide with how we've created. So I always like makes my heart sing when I hear that what you saw in Carrot Strong is a lot connected to that, because that was by design. There was intentionality there. It wasn't on accident, because we know how much it matters. But as he says a lot, like, just because I moved into administration or I got my administration credentials, it doesn't always come with it naturally, like a master's degree in implementation science. Yep. Like, people aren't taught how to do that, how to roll something out. And so I do think there's a part of it that is how do I do it? And then the final one that I think is just across all leadership pieces is a lot of times we're being asked to lead others, but we're not getting our own leadership development. One of the number one pieces, I'll just give you an example of, I was today on with a district, and I know this district well, and their biggest issue is they're not willing to actually go and have that tough conversation with the 3 middle school principals that are in their district who have been allowed to do whatever they want for the last 10 years. And it doesn't mean that those middle school principals are bad by any means. It just means that they're allowed to not be getting into that district-wide, and I'm not willing to get in there. And so what happens is, as Patrick Lencioni says a lot, who wrote 5 Dysfunctions of a Team, Death by Meeting, but he also wrote a book called The Ideal Team Player. And what he calls it is artificial harmony. And that we live in artificial harmony. And it's actually more dangerous than going right up against that line where you go to push in and sometimes maybe even make a mistake and step a little bit over and then have to ask for forgiveness. But at least we're like, that actually living in artificial harmony, living way over here on this other side where we know that something's not okay, but we're not willing to address it, that actually is way more dangerous than what we get scared of in conflict, which is pushing right up against that line. And the reason why it's more dangerous is because what happens is we go and assassinate people, so to speak, character-wise in the parking lot. That we're not willing to have the conversation here, but we're over here talking about it behind the scenes. And it just broods and broods and broods. And I think that's not just in schools, that's across any organization. But if I was to go right at it, like a couple of times you have in this podcast, a lot of times we're just not afraid to have certain conversations that need to be had. And that requires leadership. And if we don't have it, then we're going to continue to stay lukewarm, mediocre. And you know what happens? People don't want that are really good at what they do, like A-game players, like your awesome educators, counselors, the ones that are really good at what they do, they don't stick around. They don't stick around environments like that. You want to keep your very best, then you got to keep that bar high. You got to be willing to have that conversation, even if it's messy. So it's a 3-pronged answer there, but that's how I would share it with a lot of conversations that I've had over, now 24, 25 years in education.
Yeah, that's good. That's good. Hey, 30-second answer. I know we're watching time as well. 30-second answer. Hey, so I think a lot of times elementary, like primary, like elementary levels seem to be, this could be wrong, it seems to be a little bit more willing to jump into like this shift in SEL curriculum and character building and behavioral shifts and things like that a little bit quicker than secondary. Have you noticed that to be the case? Why do you think that is?
We actually started as an organization focused on the secondary level. That was the problem. When you start something, like, what's the problem you're trying to solve? Well, it's this idea that it's not just elementary students who need whatever you want to call it. If you want to call it life skills, fine. If you want to call it social emotional learning, fine. Character ed, but that side, right? Of you got the academic side, and you've got more. Whether you want to call it soft skills, which I never like that term in terms of for businesses, whatever it might be, but those more relational skills, social emotional skills, regulation skills. It's the idea that it's not just elementary students that need it. It's not just middle or high school students that need it. A 40, 50-year-old that needs these skills, just look around. And when you get an opportunity to talk with adults, they're with you. They're like, oh yeah, like my uncle or me, on more days than I'd like to admit. And so one, it's understanding that, but why then has it struggled over the years? And what we found when we came into the space of, even being an organization is that there was a lot to be offered at the elementary level. There was some at the middle level, and there was almost nothing at that time at the high school level. And even what was being done at the middle school level wasn't working. And one of the number one reasons why is it wasn't relevant, that it looked elementary. And so much of what was being offered at the middle school level, when a middle school student got it, either said, "This is what we already did this in elementary. It looks the same." In the way I used to always articulate, it looks similar, it smells similar, it feels similar, and they can smell it a mile away. And students don't benefit from something that they don't receive. And that could be that it's not being implemented. It also could be like, this isn't relevant to me. It looks like it's from the 1990s. And so if it's not being updated, right? And so what we did is we came in, the number one thing is if it's going to be something for secondary students, middle, high school, that are better be students at the table helping to create it. So our first version was built by students for students, and it needed to have an older look, older feel. You mentioned purposeful people. That's our elementary. Our secondary doesn't have the same look, doesn't have the same feel, the same name. It's different, even though behind the scenes, it has a true vertical alignment from pre-K through 12th grade. So not 30 seconds, but obviously that could go 20 minutes in articulation, but that's actually where we started. And then our schools were like, our people are loving this. What do you got for elementary? And then we went to work on that. So we actually backed into elementary. We started focused on the secondary level, but there are ongoing known things that make it harder in secondary than for elementary.
Yeah. I'm sure the staff buy-in is part of it, right? It's just it's a different model.
Yeah,
classes, right?
Here's the number one thing. I don't teach. It's not my job to teach, but I teach math. It's not my job to teach. I teach science. And it's like, no. Our job is to teach the whole child, but it's a paradigm shift. How do we weave it in? But yeah, I was a high school educator for a decade, and we are the biggest skeptics. But I also love high school educators because I think even in the bringing it forward, it's how we do it. Like you mentioned, it's got to be intentional. And what I found a lot of times with a high school level is you got to be really direct. You got to be authentic with how you're bringing forward why it's needed, how we can weave it in, how they can make it their own. We always talk about John Maxwell's law of the lid, right? There's so many people, they make this big investment, they're bringing it in, and let's say it's character strong on day one. And I'll give examples of the law of the lid, which is don't ever expect students to bring more to the room than what you're willing to bring as the educator. And it'll literally like be destroyed in the first sentence. And it sounds something like this. All right, go ahead and take a seat. All right, today we're going to start this character strong thing that we have to do. It's done. Yeah. It's been literally done in the first sentence. It's never going to go off the road because they're smart. They know this is something, this is something we have to do. This is dumb. This isn't relevant. This isn't good. And so a lot of times, what's the key to it? As Dr. Cook always says, ultimately, this is all about the adults. Everything that we're talking about here, trauma-informed care, ultimately, it's all about the adults. We put so much focus on the students. We got to put more focus on the adults. And a lot of times, just like students, if I'm saying things like that, there's always a reason for every behavior. So instead of me getting frustrated, right, with an adult, just like with a student where it's like, what's wrong with you? It's like, what if I change that to what's going on with you right now? Right? What's happening with you? And exploring that. And that's that whole, it's not change that's hard. It's the transition. And maybe we should focus more on the transition and helping build that readiness in adults so that they can be more effective and both know the why and the how, because it's either a why or a how issue.
Yeah.
I either don't understand the why or I don't understand the how. Like, how do I actually do it?
Yeah, and that's really the trick within the PD plan, right? So if you're an administrator, if you want people to implement something, you got to spend a little time on the science of why it's needed and why it works, and some data and facts and history, and then cultural feedback to get people to buy in. You got to spend some time doing that instead of saying, "Here's your curriculum," right?
Yeah, because we bought it isn't a good enough reason. Yeah, that's not a good enough reason for people to be bought in at all.
But even knowing too that we can, like, there are literal tools like Dr. Cook and our team where as an administrator, where I could be surveying my staff to find out what is the level of readiness and where is there a need. So there are literal tools that don't cost us a lot of time that would tell, do I have more of a why issue? Do I have more of a how issue? You might find the results are that 90-something% of your staff are lock solid on why it's important. Well, why are we struggling so much? Well, it's a how issue. And you can use validated like surveys, instruments to tell you that. It's like, well, what you need to do is spend more time getting in it, role modeling it, working through can I weave this in? Whereas in other cases, you don't realize it is more of the why issue. But I always say anytime you lead professional development, you need both. Because if you assume one or the other, then you have problems. So let's say, that you assume and we don't talk about the why. Well, that's a problem. If all we do is talk about the how, we just jump right in and assume, well, they've lived through the pandemic. Of course they know the why. Well, then we have a problem because then this is definitely going to be just one more thing on my plate. Right? If all I do is talk about the how, if all I do is talk about the why, but I don't give you a how, so we just spend time admiring the why, well, that's a problem too, right? Because now you're just admiring a problem, right? And not giving me a way to do it. That's really frustrating.
Yes.
Because I'm in it every single day. You don't have to tell me. I know, I see it. And so give me a how, and you got to keep bringing both of those together without admiring one over the other would be something that I've definitely learned over the years.
Yeah, well, we hear that all the time, right? Like when you have people that haven't been in education, this is one of the big drawbacks of, I think, the trauma-informed movement as well, is that we've learned so much from people that are scientists in various ways, right? Doctors of various things, but they hadn't necessarily taught in classrooms. And one of the biggest things going back, 8, 9, 10 years ago, whatever it was now, when I first started getting into all this, the thing I would hear most from colleagues where I was at was, well, I'd like to see them come in and do it. I'd like to see them come in and do it. And I thought those same things, and I thought, okay, but there's got to be something to this because there's science behind it. So then what am I doing that matches up, and what can I do that should shift, and what do I need to know that I don't know now, and what do I, but that's a hard thing for educators because you're getting hit all the time. You're getting hit all the time as an educator. You got all kinds of stuff you got to do, and then somebody tells you just go do this, or just go do that, or we just recently recorded one, right? Like, well, just build a relationship with the kid, which isn't
wrong, but it's infuriating because as a
teacher, I've never met any teacher who hasn't tried to build a relationship with a kid, and so it's super frustrating. And so actually knowing how, that's a great point, along with the why. Super.
And
important.
even too, when you think of, we always say systems over goals. Right, we can all have the goal of wanting to build relationships, but how do we then, as a system, let's just say an individual school, support that? I'll give you a great example. And one of the things I love about Dr. Cook on our team at Character Strong is he overall understands. So it's not just like the living up here and people are like, oh, that's great, but you've never actually, he's one of the few that I would say that whether it be elementary, middle, high school, district level, people go, oh, you get it. But one of the early ons, because we met actually doing the work at the district level. So I was a program administrator for the whole child. He was our outside consultant from university at the time, University of Washington, here near Seattle. And he taught on the 16 proactive classroom relationship strategies. And they were all incredible. And that's the thing, when we push back, it's interesting. It's like, well, they are really good. Maybe we should, versus just like that natural pushback. But where I offered a change was, those are all wonderful, but when they're 16, it's like, whoo, over. What if, as a building, we said, what are our 3? Or what are our 3 to 5? Or what are we going to start with 1 to 2, and we're all going to do these. Now, we've got a lot of tools that we could pull out of our tool belt, over the year, but consistently, we're going to do, and maybe it's 4 at the door, plus 1 more, and talk about the scenarios when we can't get there, like you maybe mentioned a little earlier, but like consistently, we're going to approach, and for this reason. And we're going to focus on EMR. That's it. Those are the 2 big ones across the board that we want to see. And then we teach to it. And we keep coming back to it. And I think that was the paradigm shift, as like sometimes it's like, how do we take those? And then how does it meet reality? Versus like, this sounds good in theory, but you've never actually done it. And that's where I love going to my high school friends and being like, I've lived it. I've been in there. I get it. And so you got to acknowledge sometimes the parts where it's like, they've got high BS meters.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, for sure. That's good. It's also interesting. Whatever, I'm going to reference our time again to you, John, because just for your sake, and also how nice it is to, as we start having these kind of conversations. I think what's nice about it is, one of the things that's nice about it is that the understanding that you all have from your side of, it's beyond just let me sell you some curriculum, or let me sell you some kind of framework, but there's this desire and there's this goal to truly be like, let's come alongside you and help you implement this. You're not just throwing you to the wolves. We're not just out here to make a buck or anything like that. We really want to try to help people out. And that's really what it is. I was just saying not long ago, we're in a people business, right? Like it's all people, it's all humans. And I think that's such an important thing to remember. And it seems like our experience has been, and even in this conversation today, right? That's where you guys are at too. Understanding that this isn't just numbers. This isn't just stats that we're trying to get, but it's the idea of us trying to actually improve things for humans, whether it's the adults that are involved or whether it's the kids. And I think that makes a giant difference.
Yeah, I think as I'm thinking about, we'll record our pre for this podcast, and just thinking about one of the things I'm saying is you can tell this organization loves kids and cares about educators. So I just appreciate the work that you guys are doing over there.
Right back at you. And I know that you're in it every single day, and it's just like a breath of fresh air, because when you talk with people that understand it and get it, there is an energy that comes with that.
Yeah.
Your words mean a lot. And I think about that a lot, because it's important to know that and I don't know how because I didn't come from business. I came from education. And it's an interesting part of Carrick Strong's story, because the goal was not to create a business and grow a business. The goal has always been, and we fight every day to keep it this way, was to serve the work. Just like I did when I was in a classroom at the high school level or moved to the district level. And all we're doing is continuing to serve the work. And early on, our whole motto was stay under the radar as long as we can, right? And serve the work really, really well. And don't ever get trapped into this idea of trying to grow faster than you should, because you're trying to say, look at us. Just keep serving the work really well. And if you're serving the work really well, it will naturally grow. And I think that's what's happened, and that means a lot. And that's been how we approach the work. And it's been, if anything, the most incredible gift is just expanding the number of connections to people like yourself who are in it every day. That's been one of the coolest things. But I still say to this day, the greatest job I've ever had was being a high school teacher in the classroom every day. And none of the last 8 years have even come close to beating that. That's the best job I've ever had. It's the most rewarding. It was the hardest deep down. And don't get me wrong, leading an organization is not easy. So you got to deal with a lot of adults. And when I went to the district level, a lot more adults, right? But ultimately, this is all about the adults. And what, if anything, it's taught me is I love the adults. I love the adults because they're the ones every day that are actually in there making it happen. And John Hattie's research proved what we already know. What is happening at that adult to student level is where the highest impact size. So they are worth it. And I think that's the paradigm shift a lot of times is we focus so much on the student aspect, but yet what if we're focused on the adults who are then working with the students to get them what they need? We can't lose sight of that. They are so precious to this. And when we have a day and age when we have educators leaving the profession, we need to pay attention to that, because educators, what they do matters every single day. So that's a big part of it. Ultimately, it's all about the adults so that we can serve students even better. But your words mean a lot. Thank you for that, and a great gift to be able to speak with you. We need to do this again, because I know we went over our normal time. Just meet and do all right, once a quarter, let's get a podcast, a joint one. What's up in your world? Tell me though, so those that are listening, right? So about the podcast, when did it start? Where can they find it? Where's the, when is it coming out? That kind of thing. Because I know there's gonna be a lot of listeners here that listen to the Carrick Strong podcast. They're gonna want to be learning more if they haven't already heard.
Yeah. You want me to kind of start? You can chime in.
Yeah, why don't I start and then you chime in, because I'll miss a lot of details.
Okay,
that's really good. How that goes. So we started just a couple years ago, really. Coming up in January, February, somewhere around there, it'll be 2 years. And really what it was is, again, Katie and I came to this school at the same time, and our backgrounds were both kind of special education, but beyond that, and then Katie had the administrative side of things. I had been working in a separate facility for my whole career up until I moved here. And really what we found is we just both had training and training and teaching that we have received in trauma-informed care and educational neuroscience, kind of like Katie had mentioned. And I think really early on, we had mentioned we should just do a podcast, in the first few months that we were here. And then as time went, we ended up saying, should we really do a podcast? And it wasn't that long ago. It really wasn't that long ago that we sat in front of a computer and we trialed it, right? It was just me and Katie in a room, and we did a fake podcast show. It was like little kids in a room somewhere making their own radio show, right? And so we did that, and we did that, and we watched it back, and we're like, well, at least we can talk to each other for a certain amount of time, so that's good. And we kind of went from there. Katie, I'm going to let you chime in more now.
That's pretty spot on. We really felt the need. There wasn't a lot of professional development available or around that was accessible to educators surrounding, I think Justin and I's kind of niche is like really big behavior, like kids in crisis from both of our backgrounds. And then our educational training kind of lends itself to that too. So people would ask, well, how do you do that? How do you guys able to work with this level of kids? And we just felt like there really was a need to provide professional development in the area of trauma-informed care. And so that's kind of really what started the podcast. So we just really started systematically different layers of trauma-informed care and different topics to cover to help provide some professional development, maybe for a teacher that was kind of on their own. They didn't have the support of their school administration, maybe for school buildings, maybe for districts. So that's really the heart of why we started it, was just to help provide that professional development. And it's been neat. We've been able to share our story like you guys. I enjoyed my best time is when we get to do like some PD and like live with people. Super fun. We got to meet some really cool people along the way, like books we've read. We've actually got to talk to some of those people. So that's really fun. And it's been awesome.
Yeah. And I think and I know I mentioned it earlier, but I think one of the things that was a big deal to us was to be pretty real about how things work. So we do that as best we can. We can't always, obviously we're still actively working in schools. We can't necessarily say a lot that divulges too much information about people or buildings or anything else like that. But we did want to be really real about like, hey, it's not all just rainbows and sunshine. It's not always easy. It's hard. Here's some of the things that help it be less hard that you can do. And we kind of wanted to be a potential place for people to reach out and ask us for help. And so that, like Katie said, if they don't have somebody else, they have somebody, even if they've never actually met us, that they can listen to and feel like it's in it with them.
Kind of like that heart of service, like you talked about. That's really why we're doing it. When they have that one teacher that reaches out or somebody say, thank you, I didn't think I would make it through this week, but that was really helpful. And luckily we have a great tech guy, our producer, Josh, who puts it all together. Cause I don't think Justin and I could figure out that.
No, there just wouldn't be a podcast.
Yeah. He's my Parker, who's been producing from the very beginning. And we same thing. We're just serving the work. And recently Parker, hey, did you know that we had over 1 million individual downloads? I'm like, no. And it was just because we've just been doing it every week for so long, and it doesn't happen without that support. And so, grateful and glad that you're able to share that. Yeah. And I mean, even just looking at some of the more recent podcasts, I mean, for those that are listening who really care about this work deeply, everything from a recent podcast on reframing behavior, where you had with Guy Stevens, to Landslide, importance of self-reflection, which you mentioned, Justin, at the beginning of this, leading a trauma-informed school at James Moffitt. I mean, it's a great set of ongoing resources that every couple weeks that you
bi-weekly
come
on
out
Mondays.
with a new episode.
Yeah, bi-weekly on
we
Mondays.
air a new episode.
We air a new episode. Yep.
Great. So you listen to this Re-Education podcast, and then you listen to Character Strong on Friday.
Yours on Monday.
Yeah, that's right. That's right.
You're set to go for the week.
That's right. That's right.
You can bookend the week.
Best way to do it.
It'll be amazing.
Yeah.
It's the best way to do it.
Yeah.
Awesome. Well, this has been such a treat, and I know we intentionally took liberties today as you were watching the time.
Yeah, it's too bad. That's gone. It's gone.
Whatever.
That's too bad. That's gone. It's gone. Yeah.
But we've been talking with Justin Moorman, Katie Thornton, not only from Centerville City Schools, but the host of the Re-Education of Schools podcast. And we definitely need to get on and do another episode together. But just grateful for your vision on the work. As you know, we got to keep bringing this work forward. We need to keep talking about it, right? In some cases, name it to tame it, right? Let's name these pieces and be talking about what's working, what's not working. Let's be authentic, as was mentioned. But if you were to have the final word today, we always say we need to be reminded more than we need to be taught. What would you leave our listeners with today?
Katie always makes me wrap it up, so I'll finish it up here. I would just say that you don't have to be perfect to start. And I think that's an important thing to remember for everybody, because I think teachers especially tend to have a personality where they want to do things right. And that's not bad. It's good. It's a good thing. But sometimes that paralyzes us and it makes us not want to start because we don't know exactly how it's going to go. Man, I would tell you, be brave enough to just go ahead and start, and understand that you need to give yourself grace as you're starting some of this work. And if you don't know where to start, I mean, there are organizations, right? Shameless plug here for Character Strong. Get hooked up with an organization that has easy things that are there for training, that are able to be implemented, that are going to be there as support and resources. There are ways to start without having to know it all. So don't be afraid to start.
Yeah. Grateful for that. Yeah, someone was saying just today, I said the only difference between being in the school district and now at Character Strong is that the school district I felt like wore 100 different hats. And a lot of times they were different hats. Yes, always connected in some way. The only difference now is like at Character Strong, this is what we're focusing on. So let us carry some of that weight. Let us be that responsive so you can keep doing what you're doing, which is amazing and impactful. And so whether it's that or connecting with yourselves and the great work you're doing, because I know it's not just podcasts, you do professional development, as you mentioned, and/or consulting, is find what works for you and the support needed, because we need to be able to lean on each other. And I love that. You don't have to be perfect to start. Let's start somewhere. And if we're ever going to teach students what that looks like, the number one teach is to role model, or the number one way to teach. And so even struggling through a thing and naming a thing, or with your staff, right? We're going to start, we're going to learn from each other. What a great way to teach so that we can, right? Continue to move forward. Well, I know we went over time, but it's been a good time, and grateful for you all, and look forward to the next conversation.
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks for having us on.
We always say, let's go out and do the work.
Yeah, let's go do the work.
Let's go do the work.
Hey, everybody, let's keep the conversation going.
Like and subscribe below and keep the comments rolling.